The house I lived in was an old, half-collapsed pre-war two-story building. The floors creaked, the walls were shabby, and the kitchen, toilet, and shower were all shared. Cockroaches covered the walls, and strangely enough, no one seemed to care much, at least not on my floor. Next door, elderly grandfathers and grandmothers were quietly spending their days. The cockroaches were probably the last thing they worried about. Only at the end of the corridor, near the shared kitchen, lived a young couple, students who apparently rented the room. Their friends often came over, and the chaos usually lasted until early morning. The corridor floors were filthy, and insects were feasting on that disgusting mess. It was an everyday thing. The only thing that saved me from all this filth was a sturdy metal door and some double-sided tape that I stuck along its edges. The cockroaches couldn't get into my little lair. Let's call this a bit of an introduction, so you understand where and how everything happened. But the story isn't really about cockroaches or the horrors of dorm life. It's about something else, other kinds of horrors that began about a week ago.
It was late in the evening. I had just come home from work, and the corridor was filled with the atmosphere I had long grown used to. Elderly women in house robes gossiping in the kitchen, filling it with cigarette smoke. At least that covered, to some extent, the constant stench from the drunks and old men. "Good evening," I greeted, and quickly went into my room, turning the key in the lock 3 times. I immediately switched on the electric kettle. The apartment was warm and cozy, and I didn't want to leave my room, but I had to. There was no shower in my room. Fortunately, I quickly took care of everything. Finally, after drinking a cup of hot tea, I lay down in bed and my tired eyes immediately closed. During the night, I woke up several times, not unusual for me, as I have a light sleep and can wake at the slightest sound. No matter how tired I was, the students across from my room kept making noise. Sometimes banging on the door, sometimes something else. There were plenty of reasons to wake up. But that night it was something different. From below me came a sound so distinct, as if someone were moving something heavy across the floor, a wardrobe or a dresser. Half asleep, I looked at the clock. It was just after 2 in the morning. Had I completely lost it, I wondered, and throwing on my robe, I went to the bathroom. By the way, it was in the same place as the shower, at the end of the corridor. I didn't know my neighbors and had never introduced myself. I wasn't exactly eager, and honestly, I saw no point in listening to constant elderly complaints or gossip. I had a rough idea of who was who on our floor, but who lived below me, I had no idea. The sound downstairs continued for a long time. I tossed and turned, hoping it would finally stop. After all, it was deep into the night. What the hell? Were they rearranging furniture? People had to get up early for work. I endured. I had no intention of going down to investigate. That's just my nature. I endure and endure, but sometimes patience snaps. And when it does, well, you'd better hide. That night, the only thing I did was bang on the radiator. Ours was basically the only one, and the noisy neighbors didn't ignore it. After a couple of minutes, the scraping sound below, thank God, finally stopped. Taking advantage of the quiet, I fell asleep and didn't wake again that night. Maybe they continued making noise. In any case, I didn't hear anything.
Rubbing my eyes and picking up a slipper from the floor, I muttered to myself and started banging on the radiator with all my strength. The scraping quieted down, but didn't stop. I kept hitting the radiator, hoping the old codger would finally settle down. It took about another 5 minutes. Finally, when the noise ceased, I turned to the other side and fell asleep. But that damn old man woke me up again. Judging by the clock, I hadn't slept very long. This time, the scraping was replaced by moaning sounds, like I had somehow ended up in a nursing home where everyone ached. Or maybe my mind was just playing tricks on me. Getting out of the warm bed, dressing, and going to the first floor seemed impossible. So I had to repeat the slipper and radiator procedure. But this time it didn't work. I had no choice but to get up and go check things out. I don't know, but have you looked at the time? Could you please not make noise? It's the middle of the night. People have to get up for work. You're moving things around, moaning. It's all audible. He stands there, staring at me, lips moving as if trying to say something. Then, in a barely audible, raspy voice, "Don't bang on the radiator. Why are you banging?" "Are you messing with me, old man?" I snapped, raising my voice. "I mean, don't bang around at night, messing with who knows what. I swear, next time, I'll call the police." In response, the old man simply slammed the door right in front of my face. I went back to my room. For now, it was quiet. I buried my head in the pillow. And I didn't even feel like sleeping anymore. That old fart had woken me up and I had to get up for work in 4 hours. What could I do? I grabbed my phone and lay there, scrolling through the endless expanses of the internet, hoping to fall asleep. The moaning from the floor below started just as I was drifting off. Long, heavy, monotonous groans. Luckily this time they didn't fully wake me up, and despite those damn sounds, I managed to sleep.
The next day, after work, I decided to find out from the neighbors in the corridor who lived in that room behind that other door. As usual, the kitchen was crowded in the evening. I caught a moment when the local old ladies were out for a smoke and approached them. "Excuse me," I began. They immediately turned their sagging faces toward me. I wanted to ask, "Do you know who lives in room 17? That's on the first floor, right?" A drunk voice from one of the neighbors replied, "Yeah, on the first floor." I confirmed, "Yes." They exchanged puzzled looks. I don't know. Maybe someone moved in again. I mean, no one's lived there for about 3 years, I think. What? Lord, I can't understand. It's right below me. The room groans and moves things across the floor in the middle of the night. I even went to check once. An old man? The door opened, one of the neighbors said, rising from her creaky chair. Yes, I didn't really see him properly. He just opened the door a little, peeked out with one eye. I even saw him in the morning when I was leaving for work, but didn't get a good look. Oh, that's Sasha, right? That's your name? Yes, Sasha, I replied. Well, nobody's lived there for years, she added. I doubt anyone moved in there. The aunt who was telling me all this said, by the way, she's the biggest fan of Hawthorne tincture and bootleg vodka around here, but I could tell she seemed almost sober when I mentioned the old man living downstairs. Relatives would have come by long ago. The room's been empty for, 3 years? Trust me, I've lived here for 20 years, she added. You could really see it in her demeanor. So who did I see then? I wondered. That I don't know, she said, and a chill ran down my spine. It was weird. The thing is, an old man used to live there, long ago. He was already quite old when he died. I can't say exactly when. I don't know. I just remember the smell was awful, and they couldn't find the source for a long time. When they did, his body was already bloated, eaten by worms. Maybe you saw him. Her drinking buddies laughed. Great. Booze and trouble, I thought, turning around and heading back to my room. Who am I listening to? Have I completely lost it? I completely lost it. 3 drunk old women with swollen, bee-bitten faces, and here I am complaining about my life. But after that conversation, a strange sense of unease settled inside me. Every day, whether going up or down the stairs, I would glance at that same door, the room supposedly empty according to the neighbor. The scratching continued every night, and every night I banged on the radiator hoping the old man would finally settle down.
Soon, events began that still don't make sense to me. It all seemed to start after I called the police one of those restless nights. That night, banging on the radiator didn't help, nor did knocking on the door. No one answered. I had no choice but to call the cops. They arrived quickly, probably having just finished their coffee nearby. 2 burly officers entered the building and asked what had happened. I explained the whole situation, and together we approached the ill-fated door. They knocked. Silence. "Open up! Police!" No response, as if no one was behind the door at all. The officers politely explained that they wouldn't break into someone's apartment. Noise at night alone wasn't a reason. In the end, they turned and left. I stepped outside for a breath of air, lit a cigarette, and suddenly, to my right, a light flickered on in a window. I looked. The old man was standing there, on the first floor. I could see everything clearly. A dim, weak light illuminating the room, and he was standing against the wall. Ah, so that's how you do it, I thought, quickly returning to the building. Apparently, he had seen me. A police car was approaching, and I quickly pretended that no one was home. "Come on, start banging on the door. Open up. Are you putting on a show?" This time, I think I really pushed him too far. Soon the door opened, just like last time, only a small crack revealing part of his face. Then the crazy old man started babbling. "Why do you keep bothering me? Why are you banging on the radiators? You've been living here just an hour. Don't disturb him. Don't disturb him." With each word, his voice grew louder until it turned into a full-blown scream that sent shivers down my spine. I stepped back toward the stairs.
As the door gradually opened, I was already standing at the staircase when a hand appeared in the doorway. The dim hallway light was enough to see it. A dirty limb with long peeling nails groping along the wall. At that moment, I ran up the stairs. Once in our corridor, things calmed a little. There were other people there, unlike on the first floor. It was then that I asked myself, does everyone on the first floor just put up with this neighbor? Why does no one complain? Why does no one try to reach him? I had never seen anyone there. Actually, I couldn't even remember the last time I'd seen anyone on the first floor. I had no answers to these questions.
The next morning, that same drunken neighbor who had told me no one lived in that apartment knocked on my door. She actually became my alarm clock. She came by, asking for some coins. Didn't have enough for her bottle. But after yesterday's events, I looked at her stories differently. I gave her some money and started asking her all the details. Who, what, and so on. She told me everything she knew and added one warning. If there's anyone in that room, it's better not to disturb him. Right, very witty. Sleep? Forget it. As if it were sitting there, crazy, moaning across the whole apartment. But who could actually live there if, according to her, the room was empty and the old man who lived there long ago was dead? Or maybe not. Wait, I didn't understand anything. She seemed happy and was going to the store, but I stopped her. Tell me, is that old man really dead? It was only then that I started to realize that something truly weird was happening in this building. No doubts remained when, in the middle of the night, someone knocked on my door. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but the knocking was persistent. When I opened my eyes, no one was there. Strange. I thought maybe it really was a dream. But as soon as I stepped away from the door, the knocking started again. God damn it! I quickly turned the key and opened the door. I peeked down the corridor. Nothing. The hallway light flickered weakly, and on the other side it had burned out entirely. Half the corridor was in darkness, with only the kitchen light on. I stared into the dark. 1 second. 2. 3. And then I realized, right behind my door, someone was there. Someone was standing, breathing heavily. Suddenly, a silhouette began to emerge from the darkness, moving closer. I tried to dash back into my room and close the door, but someone was holding it from the other side, so firmly that I couldn't move it an inch. In that same instant, a stench hit me so strong that my head began to spin. I rushed into my room, flicked on the light, and there was nothing. It happened. I grabbed my phone from the bed, though in that moment it barely mattered. Someone was crossing the threshold of my home, clumsily swaying, leaning against the wall. Uninvited guests were approaching me. I swear to God it was then that I heard those familiar moans again. It was him, the old man from the lower floor, the deceased grandfather. I only turned my head for a second to grab the phone and turn on the flashlight, and he had already moved right up to me, even though I was at the other end of the room. How had he crossed several meters so quickly? I hadn't heard his footsteps. Then I saw him in all his grotesque glory, if only for a fraction of a second. Pale, bloated, stinking, swarmed with flies. But it wasn't the flies that caught my attention. It was his stomach. It was ripped open, his brown, completely rotten organs nearly spilling out. He grabbed my head with his disgusting, filthy hands. I tried to fight, tried to break free from his grasp, hitting and randomly, but it was useless. He pulled me toward the radiator I had been banging on and, pressing my head against it, began striking me with the metal pipe. The pain in my forehead was excruciating. First hit, second hit. I could feel the blood running down my face. Then the third, the fourth, and I lost consciousness. Honestly, I thought he was going to smash my head to pieces. I don't know how I survived. I only came to when my neighbors entered my open room, saw me lying in a pool of blood, and called an ambulance. After that, my memory is vague. I remember lying in the hospital, a decent ward, and the police came several times asking what happened that night. I couldn't explain anything clearly. The doctors were all amazed I survived such injuries. Usually people don't, one of the young nurses told me while changing my bandages. And if you think that's where it ended, or that they all lived happily ever after, I have to disappoint you. Even in the hospital, I heard those moans. No, I wasn't dreaming, and it wasn't an illusion. I heard those sounds for real. And when I opened my eyes, he was standing there. In the corner of the hospital ward where I was lying alone, a mocking tapping on the radiator began, as if reminding me who he was and why all this had happened. By sheer luck, at that very moment, a nurse entered the ward. When she turned on the light, he vanished. Later, they placed a man next to me, probably someone who had been in a car accident. Thanks to him, the old man never appeared in the ward again. When I was finally discharged, I returned to the dorm, packed up all my things, and moved to another building. I rented a small apartment elsewhere. Old, sure, but at least free from that nightmare. I put the old room up for sale. I became afraid of every little sound, even in my new apartment. I slept with the lights on, terrified of seeing him again, hearing those cursed moans. Thankfully, everything stayed quiet. At least, for a while. About a week later, I returned to the dorm to pick up some belongings I hadn't taken the first time. I overheard a conversation among the neighbors in the shared kitchen. Apparently, the first floor of our dorm was mostly empty. Only 3 rooms were occupied. Who lived there? I don't know. They said that someone had gone to that very room because the stench had spread across the entire floor. I had noticed it too. It hadn't dissipated by the time I returned. Apparently, the loud moans of the old man bothered the new residents enough that they dared to knock on his door and express their displeasure, just like I had. Only luck was not on their side.